Before the belts and the grill, George Foreman was a hungry kid from Houston, fighting life with bare hands and big dreams. He didn't just fight, he endured hardship. Behind the grin was a man who wrestled shadows and always rose. At 76, Foreman left more than wealth, letters, lessons, and a legacy of grit, grace, and love. His children cried not for what they inherited, but for who they lost. This isn't boxing. It's a story of rising and rebuilding. Foreman's final victory was family. From Houston streets to heavyweight glory, the rise of George Foreman. George Foreman's journey didn't start under bright lights or roaring crowds. It began in the unforgiving shadows of Houston's Fifth Ward, where survival was less about dreams and more about grit. Born on January 10, 1949, George was the fifth of 7 children in a household that barely kept the lights on. His biological father, Leroy Moorhead, was absent, and his mother, Nancy Foreman, married a man named J.D. Foreman, who tried to hold the family together on a janitor's paycheck. Money was tight, and life was tough. Growing up, George wasn't a boy destined for the spotlight. He was angry, often hungry, bullied, and frequently in trouble. School was a battlefield, and the streets were even tougher. Shoes didn't always fit. Food was a luxury. According to sources close to his early years, young George wandered the neighborhood looking for fights, anything to prove he was tough enough to survive. In that world, survival wasn't a choice. It was a brutal necessity. By his early teens, Foreman's life was spiraling. Stealing, scrapping, running from the police. He was heading down a dangerous path with no clear way out. The turning point came during a tense night when, while fleeing from the law, he faced a harsh truth. If he didn't change, prison or death awaited. That moment of desperation led him to join the Job Corps at 16, a federal program for troubled youth aiming to provide skills and a fresh start. It was in Oregon, far from the streets of Houston, where George met Doc Brous, a mentor who introduced him to boxing. Foreman was raw, unpolished, but his power was undeniable. Some say almost unnatural. Under Brous's guidance, Foreman didn't just learn to fight. He learned discipline and purpose. Boxing became his lifeline, a way out of the chaos. The Olympics were no longer just a dream. They were a mission. George's transformation was rapid and remarkable. Day by day, punch by punch, he turned his life around. When he stepped into the ring at the 1968 Mexico City Olympics, he wasn't just fighting for a medal. He was fighting for every kid who had ever felt forgotten. His dominance was clear. He bulldozed through his opponents with an aggressive style that left spectators in awe. Winning the gold medal was more than a victory. It was a statement that a boy from the gutter could rise and demand respect on the world stage. But the hardest battles weren't over. Foreman's professional career took off quickly. Between 1969 and 1973, he built an undefeated streak, overwhelming opponents with a raw, punishing power that few had ever witnessed. His rise wasn't just about the wins, it was about the message. George Foreman was a force, a powerhouse that the boxing world had to reckon with. The stakes skyrocketed in 1973 when Foreman faced Joe Frazier for the heavyweight title. Frazier, undefeated and feared, was expected to defend his crown. What happened next shocked the world. Foreman destroyed Frazier in just 2 rounds, knocking him down 6 times in one of the most ruthless performances in boxing history. Overnight, George went from street fighter to millionaire champion. With fame came fortune. Endorsements poured in, and George's lifestyle changed dramatically. Flashy cars, designer suits, lavish homes. Yet despite all the glitz, Foreman admitted feeling isolated. Unlike Muhammad Ali, who thrived on charisma and charm, Foreman was quieter and more brooding. The wealth brought attention, but also loneliness. According to insiders, many around him were more interested in his money than the man himself. Foreman continued to defend his title with terrifying efficiency, besting challengers like Ken Norton and Jose Roman. But 1974 brought the fight that would define his legacy. The Rumble in the Jungle. a showdown with Muhammad Ali in Zaire. This fight wasn't just about belts or glory. It was about pride, identity, and survival on a global stage. Though Foreman was the favorite, known for his devastating power, Ali's strategy shocked everyone. Using what later became known as the rope-a-dope, Ali weathered Foreman's storm and outlasted the champion, knocking him out in the 8th round. The loss was crushing but also pivotal, marking the end of Foreman's first reign and setting the stage for a dramatic comeback decades later. George Foreman's early story is more than a sports tale. It's a narrative of struggle and redemption, of a boy from nothing who used boxing to rewrite his destiny. His journey from Houston's harsh streets to the pinnacle of the heavyweight division is legendary. But according to some accounts, it's also a story of battles far beyond the ring, personal demons, and the quest for meaning beyond fame and fortune. As we continue to explore Foreman's life, it's clear his story is about more than just punches and titles. It's about resilience, faith, and a legacy that would ultimately extend far beyond boxing into business, family, and the hearts of millions worldwide. The Fall and Rise, George Foreman's battle beyond the ring. George Foreman entered the 1974 fight against Muhammad Ali as the unquestioned favorite, a towering, unbeaten juggernaut whose power seemed unstoppable. Promoters and fans alike expected a quick and brutal victory, but Ali, with his razor-sharp mind and unshakable will, had a plan that would go down in boxing lore: the rope-a-dope. By leaning back on the ropes, Ali let Foreman throw punch after punch, exhausting himself against a seemingly immovable wall. Then, in the 8th round, Ali struck, knocking Foreman out and seizing the heavyweight crown. That loss didn't just strip Foreman of his title, it shattered the image of invincibility he had built. Suddenly, the man once thought unbeatable was vulnerable, a revelation that ushered in a much darker chapter of his life. According to insiders, this vulnerability gnawed at Foreman's spirit, igniting a battle far fiercer than anything in the ring. In the aftermath, Foreman's career stumbled. The millions he had earned, the flashy cars, mansions, and jewelry, couldn't fill the emptiness left by his defeat in Zaire. His once burning fire dimmed. He continued to fight but lost his edge. Friends noted a growing storm inside him: anger, unpredictability, withdrawal. The anger that had powered his fists began to consume him, threatening to tear his life apart. The low point came in 1977 after a stunning upset loss to Jimmy Young in Puerto Rico. Weakened by exhaustion and dehydration, Foreman collapsed after the fight. What followed was more than a fainting spell. According to George's own accounts, he experienced a near-death episode, a surreal vision of God, love, and forgiveness. In that haunting moment, Foreman pleaded for a second chance. He vowed to dedicate his life to faith and away from the violence of the ring. True to his word, Foreman walked away from boxing without fanfare or farewell fights. For nearly a decade, he disappeared from the spotlight, becoming an ordained minister and founding the Church of the Lord Jesus Christ in Houston. He preached tirelessly, often to empty pews, living humbly and trying to heal wounds from his past. His mission was clear: atone and give back. Yet the fortune Foreman had amassed evaporated. Years of poor investments and the costly upkeep of his ministry drained his resources. By the mid-1980s, the richest fighter in history found himself broke. Still, he didn't complain or seek sympathy. Instead, he kept preaching and giving, even as bills mounted and his children grew up needing more than words. Faced with mounting financial pressure, a radical idea took hold. At nearly 40 years old, George Foreman decided to fight once more, not for glory or pride, but for survival. When Foreman announced his comeback in 1987, the boxing world laughed. He was overweight, untested after years away, and far from the fearsome warrior he'd been. Journalists mocked him. Fans doubted he could last more than a round. Promoters questioned whether anyone would pay to see him step into the ring again. But Foreman wasn't chasing headlines or validation. He fought for something far more important: his family's future. At nearly 270 pounds, Foreman returned to the ring as a vastly different fighter. No longer the ripped, relentless powerhouse, he embraced the role of the friendly giant who still packed an unexpectedly devastating punch. Many believed his best days were behind him, but Foreman's blend of experience, heart, and determination made him a new kind of threat. Fight after fight, he bulldozed through lesser opponents, quietly climbing back up the ranks. But it wasn't just his wins that captivated people. It was the transformation in his personality. The once brooding, intense Foreman became a warm, humorous figure. He joked openly about his weight, smiled in interviews, and showed the world that toughness and kindness could coexist. According to sources close to him, this new George Foreman was not only fighting opponents but also winning hearts. The comeback wasn't just about boxing. It was a story of redemption, resilience, and reinvention. Proving that even when life knocks you down, the fight isn't over until you say it is. The comeback king and the grill that changed everything. The climb back to the top wasn't just a comeback. It was a shockwave felt across the sports world. In 1994, at an age when most fighters have long retired, George Foreman stepped into the ring with Michael Moorer, a younger, undefeated heavyweight champion nearly 2 decades his junior. Moorer was the clear favorite, faster, sharper, and hungry to prove himself. For 9 rounds, Foreman took the punishment, absorbing punches, being outboxed, and seemingly outmatched. But something else was happening beneath the surface. Foreman's legendary resilience, his unshakable will, and an uncanny sense of timing were coming to life. Then, in the 10th round, the moment that seemed impossible arrived. With a powerful right hand, Foreman rocked Moorer, sending him crashing to the canvas. The referee's count sealed it. George Foreman, at 45 years old, was crowned the oldest heavyweight champion in history. It wasn't just a win. It was a thunderous statement against anyone who ever doubted second chances, proving that age is sometimes just a number, and redemption is real. But this victory was more than personal glory. With the championship belt came financial security, the kind Foreman had never truly experienced before. For years, his money had vanished as fast as it came, but this time, the win was different. It was a foundation. Yet the boxing ring wasn't where Foreman's greatest financial triumph would unfold. The mid-1990s brought an unexpected opportunity. George was approached to endorse a product that, on paper, seemed worlds away from boxing, a fat-reducing electric grill. At first, the idea was met with skepticism. How could a heavyweight boxer sell a kitchen gadget? Critics allegedly laughed at the concept, thinking it was just a novelty doomed to fail. But George saw it differently. He recognized a truth about America's love affair with food and health. People craved delicious meals, but they also wanted to stay fit. Foreman's unique charm, his warm laugh, down-to-earth honesty, and undeniable authenticity made him the perfect face to bridge that gap. He wasn't pretending to be a chef. He was just a guy who loved burgers and wanted to help people enjoy them healthier. The initial infomercials were admittedly awkward. George wasn't polished, but he was real. And that realness struck a chord. Word spread. Sales exploded. According to industry reports, by the early 2000s, over 100 million George Foreman grills had been sold worldwide. The deal George struck was just as savvy as his comeback fight. Rather than accepting a flat endorsement fee, Foreman negotiated a share of the profits, a move that would net him an estimated $138 million when Salt and Inc., the company behind the grill, bought out his rights in 1999. That payday dwarfed any purse he'd ever earned in the ring. But the grill wasn't just about money. It transformed Foreman's life and legacy. Unlike his earlier fortune, which had slipped away, this time Foreman invested wisely. Real estate, trusts, diversified ventures, he built a financial empire far beyond boxing's reach. The George Foreman grill became an American cultural icon and the foundation of a new kind of success, one that married celebrity with entrepreneurship. Despite his wealth, Foreman's heart never strayed from his roots. The fighter-turned-businessman remained deeply devoted to his family. Father to 12 children, 5 sons, each named George, and 7 daughters, he balanced fame and fortune with a fierce commitment to those who mattered most. According to sources close to the family, George's greatest pride was not his earnings or titles, but the legacy he left for his children, a testament to resilience, reinvention, and the power of never giving up. Legacy beyond the ring, the man behind the champion. To George Foreman, family wasn't just important, it was everything. Growing up poor in the harsh neighborhoods of Houston, George had made a vow to himself. If he ever made it big, no child of his would suffer the way he did. No more going to bed hungry. No more wondering if the lights would stay on. That promise became his guiding light through every punch thrown and every fight endured. True to that vow, Foreman used the fortune he amassed, both in the ring and through his business empire, to build a fortress around his loved ones. Homes were bought, college educations paid for, and business ventures supported. But it was more than just handing over money. It was about giving his children opportunities he never had. Foreman once said in an interview, "Money can't raise your kids. You've got to be there." And there he was. Despite a hectic career and business schedule, George made family a priority. He showed up to school plays, cheered from the sidelines at sporting events, and made time for dinners filled with laughter and stories. He was far more than a provider. He was a steady presence, a rock for his dozen children. Knowing that money can be a source of division as much as unity, Foreman took serious steps to protect his legacy. He worked with estate lawyers to set up trusts designed to distribute his wealth fairly and carefully, aiming to prevent any legal battles that might splinter the family. His goal was clear: keep the Foreman clan united, avoiding the public feuds that often plague wealthy families. As a personal touch, George wrote letters to each of his children, notes filled not with dollar signs but with wisdom. In those letters, he shared lessons about faith, perseverance, kindness, and the honor of carrying the Foreman's name with humility and pride. These messages became priceless treasures, reminding his children of values far more enduring than money. But as the years passed, even George Foreman's famously indestructible frame began to show signs of the toll boxing had taken. Decades of grueling battles, facing legends like Joe Frazier, Muhammad Ali, and Ron Lyle, left lasting damage. Foreman underwent numerous surgeries, hip replacements, knee repairs, and treatments to mend chronic injuries sustained in the ring. His hands, once weapons that commanded fear, grew stiff and swollen with arthritis. Close friends recall how George would joke about the pain during interviews, but behind the smiles, the discomfort was very real. The chronic aches and stiffness served as reminders that the fighter's days were numbered, not in the ring, but in life itself. Alongside the physical wear, rumors began circulating in the early 2000s and 2010s that Foreman was dealing with heart complications, allegedly related to the extreme physical strain and frequent weight fluctuations from his boxing and business career. Although Foreman kept these health struggles largely private, those close to him say he was quietly preparing for a new chapter, one where fighting was no longer an option. Public appearances became more scarce. The once vigorous champion moved slower, relying on family and medical staff for support. But true to his character, George never complained. Instead, he found peace in faith, family, and simple pleasures. Fishing on quiet lakes, tending to his ranch, hosting Sunday cookouts where laughter filled the air, and reminiscing about the glory days when he ruled the heavyweight division. Behind this calm, relaxed exterior, Foreman was also working hard to secure his family's future. Estate lawyers, financial planners, and trust organizers became his new team. Hours were spent ensuring there would be no confusion, no disputes, and no bitterness once he was gone. He knew his time was limited. And just like in the ring, George Foreman refused to leave anything unfinished. This wasn't just about money or property. It was about legacy. A legacy of strength, resilience, love, and unity. As sources close to the family say, Foreman's greatest victory may have been this: building a foundation so solid that, when the final bell rings, his family could stand tall, together and unbroken. Final bell, the last round and enduring legacy of George Foreman. Early in 2025, the world was shaken by a sudden and somber announcement. George Foreman, the heavyweight legend and entrepreneur extraordinaire, had been hospitalized in critical condition. Details were scarce at first. Official statements were cautious, describing a serious health emergency that required close medical supervision. Fans worldwide flooded social media with prayers and heartfelt tributes, holding their collective breath. From boxing icons like Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield to celebrities and everyday admirers, the outpouring of love was immense, yet updates remained painfully sparse. Foreman's family, ever protective of their patriarch's privacy, released just one brief statement: "We ask for privacy and prayers during this deeply difficult time." Behind those words lay a tightly knit circle bracing for what many feared but hoped to delay. Then, on March 9th, 2025, the news broke with a quiet finality. George Foreman had passed away peacefully at his Texas ranch, surrounded by family. He was 76 years old. The reaction was swift and profound. Headlines around the globe celebrated the life of a man who had transcended boxing to become a cultural icon, a symbol of resilience and reinvention. Fellow fighters expressed deep sorrow and respect. Mike Tyson called Foreman a true warrior inside and out, while Lennox Lewis praised his unmatched spirit and generosity. The world mourned not just a boxer, but a man whose impact extended far beyond the ring. Yet behind the public mourning, an intimate and emotional scene unfolded inside the Foreman family home. Children, grandchildren, and closest friends gathered not merely to grieve, but to honor the man they had loved as dad, grandpa, and friend, not just the champ. The funeral service, as per George's wishes, was modest and deeply personal. No grand spectacle, no flashing cameras, just faith, family, laughter, and stories that painted a portrait of a man who had lived fully and loved fiercely. At the heart of the ceremony were readings from the letters George had written to each of his children. These weren't typical farewells. Instead, they were heartfelt lessons on living with dignity, humility, and kindness. Values that had always mattered more to Foreman than fame or fortune. His oldest son's voice cracked as he read, bringing the room to tears. "You have my name. Make it mean something." Another daughter shared her letter's simple yet profound advice. "Don't fight for fame. Fight for kindness." The emotional weight of those words hit harder than any knockout punch. Even the attorneys handling Foreman's estate, hardened by years of legal battles and corporate complexities, reportedly struggled to hold back tears. The estate itself was staggering. Reports estimate that George Foreman's fortune exceeded $300 million, a sum built not just from his legendary boxing purses, but amplified by the extraordinary success of the George Foreman Grill, lucrative real estate holdings in Texas and California, endorsement deals, and an astutely managed licensing empire. This was wealth few athletes achieve, and even fewer manage to preserve. Yet, according to sources close to the family, the true treasure lay not in the millions, but in the legacy Foreman carefully crafted for his heirs. The handwritten letters, the structured trusts, and the family-first directives weren't just legal necessities. They were the blueprint of a man determined to keep his family united and grounded. His final act was more than financial planning. It was a masterclass in love, leadership, and legacy. Foreman left behind a family prepared to carry his name forward with pride and purpose. The real inheritance wasn't counted in dollars, but in the strength, values, and unity he instilled. As the chapter on George Foreman's life closed, one thing remained clear. He had thrown his last punch, not in the ring, but in life. And that punch had a lasting impact on everyone who knew him, loved him, and admired the journey of a man who never stopped fighting. Not just for titles or money, but for family and faith. In the end, that was the greatest victory of all. Do you think that George Foreman left behind a good legacy? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed the video. Smash that subscribe button if you're new to the channel. Be sure to turn on the notification bell to be notified of our latest uploads. Thanks for watching.